So here it is. This is the warning: equity and options, opportunity and danger. And the warning is the execution of a partnership equity allocation and the incentive programs for equity is so mismanaged by young companies that it can destroy a cap table. It can destroy the ability of them to raise money. It can damage the corporate capitalization. And boy, I have made the case. I want you to listen because this is important stuff. So you can see it on the screen. Here is the warning, and here's the usual early stage trap. First, I'm going to make the case for you. A brand new enterprise is formed, and several partners get together, and each has something to offer. Whether one is the business person and one is the technical person, whatever that combination is, they divide the equity between the founders, and the business is started. So I'm not going to address the point of ignition, but rather we should talk and note about passing that things always change over time. And a formerly strong founder, contributor can become a drag on a business or lose interest or leave. And boy, we have seen this in TCA Fund. We have seen this in other instances where things change so much that somebody that might have had 40% leaves the business, still has a vote, and can drag the business down, but isn't involved. If I got your attention with that, it is true. So, how do you protect against the founder role changes over time? And there is a formula, so let's look at it. To protect against this, there ought to be a document in the form of some form that clearly explains the expectation of each founder and the contributions of time and resources of the enterprise. And then the document goes on to have clear buy sell clauses, forcing any sale of shares to be offered to first to the treasury of the company, which ordinarily can't afford to buy those shares, and then to the other founders in proportion to their holdings, which can be, in some cases, something that happens. And sometimes nobody has any money. And in that case, you can sell your shares to an outside investor who's an accredited investor because these companies are not public. So that clause is so important. But there's another one. There should be a mandatory sales clause in the event of separation of a founder. Wow. In other words, it's not voluntary, it should be mandatory. And why? Because the majority owners who are passive in an enterprise could easily vote against things like M&A events because they may think it's worth more, or they may vote against dilution, raising more money at a time when the company could die if they didn't agree with the board and the rest of the shareholders. I'm hoping I'm keeping your attention because this stuff isn't good. How about some rules about stock options and phantom stock, which is the way that most people pay early stage people that help them other than employees and before they raise their money, especially. So, stock options and phantom stock are the tools of early stage business. They're used to attract great talent when there isn't enough cash to pay market rates. But there are rules. So, first, you have to create a stock option plan using your attorney, which has to be registered in many states as a security offering. Now, that's easy. That's $100 and an online registration. So, don't make that a big thing. And then you worry about whether or not you can issue options if it's not a C Corp, because we have in the past talked about the form of the company. Well, it turns out you can. You can give options to LLCs or S Corp employees or board members or consultants or wherever you want. The problem is giving too much too soon. If you see that as you're next to the last headline on this first slide, most early stage companies make the mistake of just granting options to new hires at all levels that are so aggressive, they distort the cap table of the company to a degree that damages future professional investment. Did you hear that? I mean, be very careful. And I have some formulas. So there are a few rules of thumb to help to make those early stage entrepreneurs and even the investors aware. An option plan should carve out about 15% of the fully diluted shares. If there are 85,000 shares in the company, for example, to make this easy, 15,000 more shares should be in a pool reserved for future hires and for board members and sometimes for a few consultants, making a total of 100,000 shares. That means you have a 15% option pool. Now, the board must approve this plan in order for the shares to be allowed. And then the shareholders must approve it. Why? Because anything that dilutes the shareholders will give them less value. And so, therefore, they have to vote on it. This is true of a lot of things, taking new money, creating an option plan. There are a few other things that can too, but those are the two big ones. So, how do you price your options? Well, the price per share is an important consideration and one that is so important legally because IRS Rule 409A is what we rely upon. It specifically calls for an appraisal of the value of the company's stock within a year, within a year of any grants of options. Although there is an exclusion for early stage businesses in which expert members of the organization or its board can make such an appraisal and qualify for the exemption. Well, after Dodd-Frank, ain't nobody gonna do that. I used to do it because I have that expertise and had gone through a class to teach me even more. And I won't touch it now because the Dodd-Frank rules are very specific. And companies like Carta came along for around $1,600 and they'll do it. So for $1,600 a year, if you're issuing options, do it. If you are an employee, which is defined as 32 hours a week or more, you will have an option which allows you not to be taxed when you exercise, but rather when you sell. And that's a qualified option. If you are a board member or somebody that doesn't work 32 or more hours, you have a non-qualified option and you are exercised at the moment. I mean, you are taxed at the moment that you exercise. And I have had instances where people have exercised because they were so excited about the company, they wanted to start their 5-year Rule 1202 clock, and then the company goes bankrupt. But they had to pay tax on the value of the exercise at the point when they made it. And I have one CEO who did this. He was so excited about his company, he mortgaged his house for the money, the tax money, to pay for the exercise. Ouch. Okay, let's get back to the program here, okay?
All right.
Pricing rules. If you have only one class of stock, common stock, which is pretty typical of early stage companies just like the founders, and there's an appraisal of that class at, say, $2 a share, those options have to be priced at the same $2, which is no bargain to the optionee. And remember why you issue options? You want to attract employees and you want to keep employees or people who are associated with the company. But if it's one class of stock and nobody sees a bargain but hopes for the future, that's okay, but nowhere near as good as if there are two classes of stock. Where do you get the second class of stock? Typically, it's from the investor. Investors invest in a separate class which has distinction and many more rights. And those extra classes of stock rights allow you to make the option price much less than the price of the investor's stock. And so it turns out that 20 years ago, there was a rule that said that was 1/10. It was an arbitrary rule the VCs put together, that therefore you could price your options at 1/10. The IRS got wise to that one. Today, the average is 1/5 for very small companies that get VC money, but it still requires a 409A before you can tell what that is. It might be much more than 1/5, but that was your rule of thumb about that. So, what percentage of the total company should be reserved for specific job titles. I said that the pool is 15%, but what does that mean? Well, you come with a new CEO. Sometimes that happens, especially if a venture capital company got involved as opposed to angels. And that CEO deserves 5 to 8%, which could be half of the option pool or a third. And that size of grant would take so much of the pool, you got to be careful. Now, the VCs may ask you to load the pool, which means take the company and create that pool with a higher amount, which devalues the rest of the shares. But they have you do that before they invest so that you're the one who loses value before they invest. So let's keep going. A vice president or any CXO candidate typically is offered 1.5% or 1%, depending on how important and what the role is. Then you get down one level to director level, which is the third level down, and that's typically 0.5%. All the other grants are much lower, allowing for that pool to last for a very long time. But think about if you replace the CEO and you want to attract a really good one, you've got 5 to 8%, and that's a typical number. So I just gave you numbers you may have heard before, but they're important. All right, how about vesting? David just alluded to it, so I'm going to say it again. Options typically are earned over time. We call that vesting. So a grant of 10,000 shares may be made in January, but first, typically there is a 4-year vesting period, of which the first year is called a cliff. And the cliff means, if you do this right and your plan is written right, in the first year, if that employee leaves or is fired, no options can be exercised at all. Just ain't fair. Ain't fair to the company, and maybe it ain't fair to this former employee that's gone, who knows. But either way, you're vesting 1/48 over 4 years, of which the first year vests 12%, and if you last a day longer than a year, you could actually exercise an option for 12%, and then 1/48 after that until you get 4 years. And I have exercised options in companies I was really anxious for and thought they were great, even though I wasn't on the board. I did that with a company that I helped to found called Influential Network. And I bought stock, and I had options, and I put stock into ACE 2, and Influential just sold for $500 million. That's a big number since we were at the table when it was worth only $1 million. And so you buy low, you sell high, and sometimes options are worth a lot of money. And so the first tranche that came to us, which was half of that in cash, for me was $500,000 just for the options. And get the idea, therefore, that options can be worth a lot of money to the board member and the investor. And again, there you go. So one more thing that just kind of is something we know about. A little sophistication. Senior staff. What should be different between CXOs and maybe one level down and all the rest of those options? It's an important consideration because it may attract people, and very smart attorneys for those people negotiating employment agreements will catch this. It's an issue for candidates that we're talking about, CXO, and we call these trigger provisions. And selected options are negotiated by that selected group that I just mentioned. They fully vest to 100% to 100% on any change of control. Mm-hmm. And that allows the selected individuals to perhaps profit handsomely in an acquisition because they're probably going to be gone, or at least some of them. They'll be given contracts. You know that the founders, there's kind of a rule here, are going to be gone a year after the acquisition because they lose interest in the acquiring company and the way that acquiring company is changing their company, their baby, and they're going to be gone. So why shouldn't they have their fully vested options ready to go? The negative side of this is the buyer probably doesn't want to see these managers go. So the buyer either has to match with options of equal value to make the employees especially just as happy to stay without having to go search for another startup to do this all over again, or go, in which case out goes the intellectual property with the minds of the people that leave. Not good. So if all of this seems overwhelming, and it probably does, we have just scratched the surface of options and plans and incentive compensation. There is so much more. Phantom stock, uh, giving warrants. There's so much more we're not going to talk about today. It's an area of expertise that a CEO is just required to learn quickly and carefully and manage well. And that's where an attorney comes in. Or in the case of some of us that have been through this, in my case, I can't tell you, maybe 80 times, a lot of times, we have the knowledge because we got it from those attorneys and we're the ones to guide. But be aware, when I talked about options and equity and opportunity and danger, I meant it.